everyone. The title of this lecture recital is Gendering the Salon, Dialogues between Maria Zimnowska and her male contemporaries. It is dedicated to introducing the music of Maria Zimnowska, a Romantic era female composer whose works have largely been forgotten today. By placing her music alongside more familiar repertoire by John Field, J.N. Humboldt, and Friedrich Chopin, I aim to show how her compositions actively contributed to the development of earlier Romantic piano genres. This lecture recital is divided into 4 sections. In the first section, I will introduce her life as a pianist and composer. The second section focuses on the salon. In number 3, I will explore her social connections. And finally, we will listen to music by her and her 3 male contemporaries, Field, Humboldt, and Chopin. Section 1, Maria Zimnowska's life. Maria Zimnowska was born in Warsaw in 1789 into a culturally active family. Her parents ran one of the most vibrant salons in the city, a place where writers, aristocrats, painters, and musicians regularly gathered. This artistic environment shaped her musical sensitivity long before she received formal training. Unlike many male virtuosos who came through conservatory systems, Zimnowska's musical education was fragmented, informal, and largely self-directed. She studied briefly with 2 local teachers, but most of her growth came from listening, observing, imitating, and performing in her parents' salon. In many ways, she developed within a feminized musical sphere. Throughout the 1820s, Zimnowska undertook several major concert tours across Europe and many cities across Russia. Critics across Europe admired her sweet tone, lyric touch, and brilliant virtuosity. London audiences received her enthusiastically. And in Paris, she moved among leading cultural figures of the Restoration era. She performed for loyalty and was often compared to the greatest virtuoso of her day. In 1828, after years of international success, Zimnowska moved permanently to St. Petersburg. The decision was artistic as well as practical. With support from members of the Romanov court, she secured a respected teaching position at the Women's Institute. Her home quickly developed into one of the city's most active salons. There are also claims that she studied composition informally with several important figures, including Humboldt and Field. However, scholars have found no evidence that she formally trained with any of them. What we can say is that she engaged deeply with the musical circles this composer occupied, and their stylistic influence clearly shaped her work. Let me begin this section with a very simple question. If I ask you to name some composers, who comes to mind? Most of us immediately think of Bach, Monteverdi, Haydn, Brahms, Schumann, and honestly, there are a lot of names that comes to our mind. If I don't stop you, we could probably take 10 minutes just listing the composers. But now, let's change the question. Name some female composers. Who will you come up with? Suddenly, the list becomes much shorter. Maybe Clara Schumann, Fanny Hansard, Amy Beach, Florence Price, and if you are a UMKC student, you might probably add one more, Chen Yi. But notice something. Even when we do name women, Some are often introduced through the men around them. Clara Schumann, the wife of Robert, and Fanny Hansard, the sister of Felix. And remembered, my original question was simply name composers. I never specified the gender, yet most of us instinctively list only men. So why is this case? Is it because women somehow lacked the ability to compose? Clara Schumann herself once wrote in her diary, "A woman must not desire to compose. No woman has been able to do it, and why should I expect to?" Clara's word was not a confession of inferior talent. It was a window into the gender ideology that shaped women's musical self-perception. Women were never absent from musical creativity. They were discouraged, excluded, and later erased in how music history was written. Their contributions were pushed into the margins, overshadowed by the men around them. For women in the 18th and 19th centuries, the obstacles were structural. They were barred from conservatories, and they were told that public concerts were not appropriate for women. Their musical training was framed not as a professional pursuit, but as a refinement for marriage. And it is precisely because of these barriers that the salon emerged as a crucial artistic space for women. The salon allowed women to step into public life without appearing to violate social expectations. It is the semi-public space, open enough to shape artistic life, yet private enough to remain socially acceptable. Within this gendered landscape, Maria Zimnowska's achievement became even more extraordinary. She formed the foundation of her artistic identity through her parents' salon, and as she began touring across Europe, salons remained essential to her professional strategy. In these gatherings, she performed her own composition, also works by her contemporaries such as Field and Humboldt. Salons amplified her reputation, attracted patrons and supporters, and created a network through which news of her artistry traveled across the border. When Zimnowska settled in St. Petersburg in 1828, she created one of the city's most vibrant cultural salons, connecting artists, diplomats, writers, painters, and musicians, turning her home into a cosmopolitan culture hub. In a world where women were denied position in public musical institutions, the salon became her primarily professional stage. In this section, I will introduce 3 musicians whose interactions with her shaped her artistic world. We often read that Field was Zimnowska's teacher, but in fact, not documentary evidence confirms a formal teacher-student relationship. Zimnowska and Field both worked in St. Petersburg in 1820s. Contemporary press reports indicate that they even played 4-hand piano together, suggesting close musical contacts. Field also wrote a rare letter of introduction for her to the publishing house. In this letter, Field praised her talent and refined taste, recommending her works to publication. This shows an extraordinary level of artistic respect. On her side, Zimnowska frequently performed Field's composition during her European tour. Stylistically, her earlier works engaged deeply with Field's idiom. Zimnowska and Field were artistic colleagues engaged in a shared pianistic dialogue, each influencing the other within the salon-based musical world. Humboldt. He was one of the greatest pianists, bridging classical clarity and earlier romantic brilliance. Zimanowska met him during her German tours, and she regularly performed her work. What is remarkable is how her playing was evaluated in relation to Hummels. In an 1828 letter to Goethe, the influential critics wrote, Zimanowska's playing is superior to Hummels. This is astonishing. Hummel was at the peak of his fame, and Zimanowska was taken seriously as an equal, even in a male-dominated virtuoso tradition. Finally, we come to Chopin, the young composer who would later redefine the polished piano tradition. As a teenager in Warsaw, Chopin attended Zimanowska's concerts. In a letter from around 1827, he wrote enthusiastically, I shall go again to hear Mrs. Zimanowska. Her music, especially the 1819 collection of etudes and preludes, predates and anticipates elements of Chopin's mature style. And in part 4, I'd like to move from biography and networks to musical language. From Hummel and Field through Zimanowska to Chopin, we can trace a clear stylistic evolution in earlier 19th century piano writing. Hummel represents the final refinement of classical clarity and balance. Field introduces a new lyrical, introspective idiom in his nocturnes, and Zimanowska, as an important transitional figure, absorbs these classical roots while experimenting with a freer, more expressive pianistic language. By the time we reach Chopin, this tendency culminates in a highly poetic, harmonically nuanced romantic style. Together, these composers illustrate the gradual shift from classical elegance to the deeply personal and emotive voice of the Romantic era. Over the course of her career, Zimanowska wrote around 100 pieces, and unsurprisingly, for a famous pianist, the vast majority are for solo piano. Musicology Dostoevsky suggests that her piano pieces fall into two main style groups, as shown in the slides. Group 1 consists of salon-friendly, technically accessible, charming pieces. These aren't exactly the kind of genres that women were allowed to write in the 19th century. Small, lyrical, domestic, associated with sociability rather than the public authority. Group 2, however, is quite different. These are virtuosic professional concert works. This second group shows us that Zimanowska was not confined to pretty salon pieces. She wrote pre-Chopin concert idioms that demand a high level of technique and a difficult sense of style. And we learned that her music circulates widely, and this transnational publication network tells us that her music belonged not only to the domestic salon, but also to a broader professional marketplace. With that context in mind, I'd like to focus on three genres where we can most clearly hear her dialogue with her male contemporaries: the nocturne, the polonaises, and the etude. The nocturne grew out of the 18th century night music, such as serenades, and it became an independent piano genre through John Field, the first composer to publish work titled Nocturne. In this part, I will introduce the nocturnes of Field, Zimanowska, and Chopin, comparing their styles and tracing how the genre developed from one composer to the next. Field, often regarded as the father of the nocturne, he established the defining traits of the nocturne: an intimate, poetic atmosphere, a lyrical singing melody, and with a left-hand arpeggiate accompaniment. Field cultivated a pianistic ideal of quiet virtuosity, inward, delicate, and seemingly effortless. We can hear this clearly in his Nocturne in E-flat major No. 1, which captures a gentle, introspective sound word rather than dazzling technical display. Another hallmark of Field style is the long vocal melodic line supported by a steady arpeggio left hand. Field absorbed the expressive cantabile of 18th century Italian vocal tradition, translating it into a pianistic texture. The right hand carries a highly lyrical melody, while the left hand maintained a flowing broken chord pattern. This texture became the foundation of the nocturne as a genre, later taken up and reinterpreted by Zimanowska and eventually expanded by Chopin, who infused it with his own admiration of Bellini's bel canto style. If we look briefly at the score from the example we just heard, we can see exactly this. The right hand sings a long expressive line, while the left hand provides a steady, rolling arpeggiate accompaniment. And in his Nocturne No. 5 in B-flat major, we can see the similar texture as well, as shown in the score example. And where does Zimanowska fit within the Nocturne tradition? According to Grove Music Online, in terms of the Nocturne, Zimanowska stands stylistically between Field and Chopin. And this is exactly how I would like to present her here. As we can see in the score example, the first one, Zimanowska clearly adopted the established nocturne idiom, a cantabile melodic line supported by arpeggiated accompaniment. In this respect, her writing operates very much within a Field-style sound word. At the same time, Zimanowska introduces elements that are distinctly her own, particularly through more delicate and decorative ornamentation. At its first appearance, the main melody is relatively simple, consisting largely of dotted half notes and eighth notes. When the theme returns at measure 9, marked by the purple circle, she enriched the same melodic material with added ornamentation, allowing the repeated phrase to sound more embellished and expressive. Another strategy Zimanowska employs in thematic repetition is textual change. In the second score example, the image in the middle, we can observe this clearly. In the first line, the right hand carries two voices, while the left hand shifts to repeated chord accompaniment. On the third line, the left hand changed to long arpeggiate figures. Although the textual changes, it remains fundamentally grounded in the tradition Field-style nocturne texture. Finally, Zimanowska's role as a famous virtuosic pianist is also evident in her nocturnes through moments of unexpected technical difficulty. In the final score example, marked with the red circle, the white lip in the right hand spanning over 2 octaves, require precise control and accuracy. This passage subtly elevates the technical demands while remaining within the intimate, expressive world of the nocturne. Chopin, as we know, takes the nocturne tradition even further. His nocturnes clearly absorb the textual and idioms established by Field, and Chopin himself openly acknowledged about that. Another crucial influence on Chopin's melodic writing is Bellini, the Italian opera composer. Inspired by Bellini's bel canto style, Chopin developed long, highly lyrical melodic line enriched with extensive coloratura-like ornamentation. In the first score example, marked in red, we can see an extreme case, more than 48 notes compressed into just 1.5 measure, transforming vocal virtuosity into pianistic expression. Chopin's harmonic language is also far more adventurous than that of his predecessors. In this nocturne, we can observe this through chromatic melodic writing, modo mistral, mediant-related modulation, and extensive use of secondary leading tone chords. In the second score example, the passage highlighted in red featured half-stepped motion in the melodic line. And within the same passage, we can also observe a clear example of modo mistral. The home key of this nocturne is D flat major, where the leading tone 7th chord would normally be C, E flat, G flat, B flat, a half diminished chord. Chopin, however, lowered B flat to B double flat, transforming the harmony into a fully diminished 7th chord. This alternation suggests a borrowing from the parallel minor, D flat minor, intensifying the harmonic language. Chopin further enriched the harmonic language through mediant modulation. In the scored example on the right, the music modulates from D flat major to A major, a relationship that appears distant at first glance. However, if we reinterpret the context through D flat minor, the pitch A corresponds inharmonically to B double flat, the lower 6th scale degree. In this way, Chopin creates a subtle median relationship that links the two tonal areas. Finally, Chopin's harmonic language is animated by his consistent use of secondary leading tone chords. In the left-hand score example, we can see how the secondary chords continually push the harmonic language forward. In this lineage, Zemnovska is one of the composers who internalized Field's model, adapted it into the female-coded space of the salon, and helped to create the stylistic environment in which Chopin's nocturnes became possible. Now I'm going to play the first set of the program, Nocturne from Field, Zemnovska, and Chopin. Now let's move to the second genre, the polonaises. Originally, the polonaises was a processional aristocrat dance, serving as a ceremonial entry for the nobility. It was deeply tied to Polish court culture and later became associated with Polish national identity. By the late 18th and earlier 19th centuries, however, the polonaise was also stylized for the keyboard. In this form, it entered the world of the salon, shorter in scale, elegant in character, and suited to domestic and semi-public performance. Importantly, unlike the original dance, with its strongly masculine and aristocrat symbol, the salon polonaise was considered socially acceptable for women both to compose and perform. Zimnowska belongs to this salon-oriented phase. Later, with Chopin, the polonaise was transformed into a concert and national genre, large-scale, dramatic, and often heroic. To understand her position more clearly, it is helpful to place her alongside Hummel and again Chopin. Hummel's polonaises are written in a brilliant style, referring to a virtuosity-oriented idioms that emphasize brilliant clarity and display. Chopin furthered the structure of his polonaise, Opus 70 number 2, follows a clear dance form, ABA. Its overall character is notably square and balanced, reflecting classical clarity and symmetry. Each phrase is 4 measures long, with a very regular cadential design. The first 4-bar phrase typically ends with a half cadence, followed by a perfect authentic cadence in the second phrase. Special attention should be paid to tempo when interpreting Hummel's music. As one of his contemporaries wrote, tempo rubato was hateful to him. Hummel strongly disliked rubato, and his music generally requires a steady, strict tempo. Zimnowska's polonaise clearly participate in the same brilliant style tradition, but they aim towards a different expressive goal. While the overall structure remains the same as Hummel's ABA, her phrasing is noticeably less symmetrical. If we look at the first half of the A section, for example, we find 3 phrases organized as 6 plus 4 plus 4 measures, rather than Hummel's regular 4-bar units. Moreover, these phrases are not parallel to one another, creating a sense of irregularity and flexibility. The rhythmic writing also becomes less predictable. In the final measure of the second line, the first beat contains 4/16 notes, with the second and third slurred while the first is marked staccato. In the second measure of the third line, accents appear on the second 8th notes of both the first and second beats. This subtle rhythmic and phrasing disruption gently loosen the classical framework and push the genre toward a more expressive, salon-oriented sensibility. Chopin's mature polonaise displays remarkable pianist brilliance and a distinctly heroical character. Works such as Opus 40 number 1 and Opus 53 function almost as nationalist statement, symbolizing Polish identity through dramatic gestures, expanded formal scale, and powerful keyboard sonority. By contrast, several of Chopin's earlier polonaises still reflect the elegant salon tradition. The polonaise in G-sharp minor, which was composed in 1822, when Chopin was only 12, is a clear example. Its ternary ABA structure with repeated section follows the classical era models. yet it already reveals hints of Chopin's emerging harmonic imagination. The writing is surprisingly virtuosic for such a young composer. Rapid triplets passage and addition of double third in the repeat foreshadow the technical and expressive boldness of his late style. We can have a little bit of the Polonaise from 12-year-old Chopin. Now, I'm going to play the second set of the program, Polonaise from Hummel and Szymanowska. Finally, let us turn to the etude. The etude originated in the late 18th century as a purely practical genre, short exercise designed to isolate and develop a single technical skill. The period between 1810 and 1820 was crucial in the history of etude. Composers such as Clementi and later Cherney transformed the etude from a simple pedagogical drill into something more substantial. Nevertheless, these earlier sets were still largely understood as technical studies rather than concert pieces. Zimnovska's 20 Exercise and Prelude, published in 1819, appeared precisely at this turning point. Her collection predates the major etude sets of Humboldt and Cherney and anticipates the expressive direction later perfected by Chopin. Yet these works are far from dry exercise. Contemporary critics already recognize their artistic value, and Robert Schumann later described them as good at improving the woman's form of feeling. Stylistically, this etude combined practical clarity of technical focus with elegance, contemporary melodic writing, and a salon-oriented sensibility. Each etude concentrates on a specific technical problem. For example, etude number 1 focuses on rapid running passage in the right hand, as shown in the score example. The second expert comes from etude number 4, which emphasizes the practice of third, while simultaneously presenting a highly lyrical melodic line. Let's listen to a brief excerpt. Zimnovska's etude also provides an important earlier model for Chopin's concert etude. While Chopin greatly expanded the harmonic language and expressive scope of the genre, the fundamental idea of transforming a technical pattern into a poetic miniature can clearly be traced back to Zimnovska's pioneering approach. Scholars have identified multiple one-to-one textual correspondence between Zimnovska's etude and Chopin's. Here we can see two groups of examples. In the first group, Zimnovska's etude number 1 and Chopin's etude 10-8 both emphasize rapid right-hand running. Here's Zimnovska. And here's the Chopin 10-8. In the second group, both etudes focus on leaping or jumping technique, again transforming a technical challenge into expressive musical material. And here's the Chopin's etude. So to conclude, Maria Zimnovska should not be understood as a margined figure standing outside the Romantic canon. Instead, she was actively involved in shaping the earlier Romantic piano language. Through genres like the nocturne, polonaises, the etude, she absorbed Field's lyric style and Hummo's brilliant style, and reshaped them within the intimate, flexible world of the salon. What's especially important is that the very genres she cultivated later become central to Chopin's output. This suggests not coincidence, but aesthetic lineage. Zimnovska's music shows that technical study and poetic expression could already be combined before Chopin, and that this combination emerged in smaller, refined genres rather than large public forms. Reconsidering Zimnovska's changed how we hear earlier romantic piano music. It invited us to understand it not as a sudden breakthrough by isolated geniuses, but as a shared musical language shaped by social spaces, performance practice, and multiple creative voices. And finally, we have the last set of the program, etudes from the Zimnovska and Chopin. Thanks everyone for coming. Have a good final.